Welcome back, everyone. This is The Nerdy Truth, where we focus on harnessing citizen innovation to help develop our country for the future. I'm your host, Dr. JJ Walcott, and today we have with us Ira Raab, who has spent his life on the bench in New York City and now is in Florida conducting all kinds of work for the political system here, and in particular, talking to us about how, as citizens, each one of us can get involved and make a difference. Without further ado, let's bring in our guest.
Hey,
Hello, sir.
finally.
So happy to have you with us.
Same here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The way we love to start this is for you to tell us who you are and give us a little bit of background on your experience and what you've learned over the years that we could all learn from you.
All right, my name is Justice Ira J. Raab. That's R-A-A-B. I'm a retired justice of New York State Supreme Court. In Florida, I'm an officer of the Palm Beach County Democratic Party. I'm the co-chair of the Rules Committee of the Florida State Party, and I'm very active locally in the city of West Palm Beach and the county of Palm Beach.
You have been busy.
Very busy. I'm more busy now than I was when I was on the bench.
Well, you must be watching what's happening today with a lot of energy and maybe a bit of apprehension.
A lot of apprehension, not a bit.
Not a bit of enthusiasm, I take it.
Unfortunately, with the president we have in Washington, that's a problem.
Well, nonetheless, as it goes, we all have to find ways to work together, whether we agree or we don't, and help our citizens move forward. I understand you've had a fair amount of experience with disaster recovery relief and planning for communities and different groups to be able to move forward. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
I'm active with the League of Women Voters. I'm involved in the census committee of the League of Women Voters. I'm involved in the election committee, that is to get people registered to vote, and especially the felons, former felons, who have a problem paying their fines and fees. And that's a very active committee that I'm on.
Very nice. Yes, we've been going through a lot in Florida, moving that information forward.
Unfortunately, we haven't had people filling out their forms online with regard to the census, and we're very much down compared to 10 years ago.
Wow. Why do you think people are unwilling or late or slow to be
Well,
filling out those forms?
probably multiple reasons. The coronavirus probably is one of them. Lack of education, lack of understanding, apprehension. A lot of people may have fears because of the situation involving the citizenship issue, even though the citizenship question is no longer on the form. And people are afraid. People who are immigrants are afraid. Families are afraid. And that's a big problem.
Indeed. Well, help educate some of us. Not everybody does realize what decisions are made based on that information and how it affects each and every one of us directly.
Before I start, I want you to know, and all your listeners to know, that all the information that is given is confidential. Nobody will ever know how or what you said in responding to the form. The information that is given goes into a big giant database and affects many, many things that involve operation of the country. One has to do with getting federal funds to the local communities, the states, counties, and so on, based upon the amount of people that are in a particular state or otherwise. So if you have a high count, you get more money from the federal government. If you have a low count, you get less money from the federal government. Another issue has to do with the redistricting in all of the House, that is the federal House, state Senate. All of the district lines change every time there's a census every 10 years. And again, the more people you have, the greater population, the greater representation you're going to have in your local communities and state and so on. It also has to do with the number of congressmen that each state gets. The more they have, the more Congress people they have. The less they have, the less congressman people they have. Here in Florida, we have a situation we're entitled to one already, no problem. And if the count is higher, we get a second member of Congress. And that's another situation. If we don't get it, some other state's going to get it.
That's right.
States are competing for those seats, and states are competing for the federal funds as well. The states that get a higher count will get more money. The states that have a lower count will get less money.
And then how does that translate to something very specific that's happening to all of us today? We're talking about allocations of PPE, personal protection equipment. We're talking about decisions where food and support are given to our citizens. We're talking about how money is going to be allocated for unemployment, for support for small businesses, for the recovery that is going to be necessary after all of this happens. Tell us about how somebody who maybe isn't as involved in politics as you and I can understand, when I fill this out, this is what may happen to me in the next 6 months that matters.
Well, let me give you an example. For every person who fills out the form, that state gets 1,600 to $2,000 every year for 10 years. So that's $16,000 or $20,000 for every person who fills it out. And when that tax money goes into the state, which divided down into the counties and so on, that's less tax that you have to pay to run those operations, because the federal government is giving you that money based upon your count.
That is a very clear way to put that. I never knew the translation of how the money actually is dispersed and coordinated.
Well, it's dispersed based upon the population.
Right.
So if the population is high, you'll get more. And if the population is low, you get less. And the amount we're talking about is $1,600 to $2,000 per person per year for 10 years.
Wow. That is impactful. That is a big deal. Now, how long does everybody have to fill those out and get them in?
Well, they give the extension now. It's now to October. Originally, it was going to be a lot earlier. And the problem is that enumerators, that's people who are hired by the Census Bureau to knock on doors to get your information if you didn't fill it out yet. Most people are afraid to go because of the coronavirus. So the federal government has extended the period of time to October.
Well, that will help. That will help substantially, being able to do that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, once the enumerators go out, the count should be higher.
Absolutely. And so how does it work to have people go door to door then, now that we can't, we've been a shelter at home state that has changed somewhat, but how does that affect the individuals that are going around the country?
Before I tell you, let me explain to you that back in the 1960s, I was an enumerator myself. In those days, we didn't have the computers. Everyone had to be counted by in-person visits. And I had my district in North Woodmere, and that's in Nassau County, Long Island. And I went around to every single house with my clipboard and asking the questions to fill out the form that I filled out for them. And I found that some of the people didn't open their doors. So I took my two little children with me. And when the people looked out their peek holes and they saw a man with two little children, the doors opened up more readily. So I was able to count more people. That was my experience back in the 60s. Today, it's entirely different.
Sure.
Most of it is online. And the Census Bureau had anticipated about 70% of the people were going to fill it out online. Right now, only 30 to 40, and you're lucky 50% of people have done it. That means more enumerators knocking on doors.
Wow. Yeah, it's going to be substantial then as we go into the summer and then back into the fall, trying to figure out how to do this during this time frame.
And that's true.
Yeah. So what else are you observing as you're moving through this political stage? And obviously you have strong position and a viewpoint, having lived in both New York and in Florida, and certainly in a hot spot right now. What are you seeing in the political climate that has you? Well, we know you're probably quite concerned, but what has you excited? What are you seeing that people are doing that is helpful?
Well, let me tell you about one of the serious problems we have. In Florida, we had an amendment that allowed former felons who finished their terms of sentence to be able to register to vote. Then the legislature, representing one particular party, which I won't get involved politically, decided that the people had to pay all their fines and fees. Well,
Right.
unfortunately, a lot of the former felons don't have the money to pay their fines and fees, which could be thousands of dollars, and therefore they can't vote. There was a case up in Tallahassee, a federal case, and that federal case determined that it is unfair, it's unconstitutional to require people who don't have the money to pay the money before they'd be allowed to vote. And that cases are going on right now as you and I are speaking, as people are listening. Judge Hinkle is actually on the trial, listening to the witnesses, and going to have a decision very soon as to whether or not that's constitutional or not to require people to pay in order to vote.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm very well aware of how this is all working in our state. And for those who don't live in the state of Florida, the sticking point, regardless of your political affiliation, is that when an amendment is passed in the state, the politicians, again, regardless of side, oftentimes pass new laws that then create a situation where that amendment essentially can't go into place. And
That
so the
is,
frustration is that for the citizens who are not particularly politically involved, but instead are simply saying this is what we wish to happen in our state, there's a huge amount of frustration that when that vote is made, again, regardless of political party, that there is so much power within the political system to be able to essentially override it. And so
that's
that's what's happened in our state. They added a new rule. That new rule then effectively, maybe not exactly legally, but effectively ended up erasing the impact that was intended by the amendment that was made. And so this, this gets into kind of a bigger problem and something that we talk about in the book that I'm releasing in a couple weeks. And the focus is on recognizing how the political system works, how the money moves, and how most of us, just regular citizens, we don't invest in politicians the way that individuals who have large companies or lots of money do, right? That's part of their investment portfolio because it directly affects their company. But for most of us citizens, maybe we give $2, $5, $50 even. We're not really players in that arena, and yet a lot of decisions are made on our behalf.
they,
And
people are decision makers. Every election day, when they go into the voting booth and when they vote, they are decision makers. They are deciding who is going to run the government.
nonetheless, I think the pushback is that the decision has been made prior to us going into the voting booth, down to two individuals, maybe a few more at best, but generally speaking, two. And it's not like you get 30 choices to pick who you like best. You often end up by that point, by the general election, picking the one that you know you dislike the least. At least that's what I think. A lot of people feel like they're forced to choose between two options that maybe they don't feel are ideal.
It's called the lesser of two evils.
I'm afraid so. So while I agree with you, you have power to go in and vote, I would very much argue that there are things that we can all do that are worth far more than just our vote. As I went around the country and toured all 50 states, talking to individuals from all walks of life and all sorts of backgrounds and experiences, there was a constant theme that people who got involved in their communities, people that that contributed to science, or who were helping to build the infrastructure, or who were ensuring that our people can eat and growing the crops and making sure that that information is being shared with everyone. Those are the people that really have a huge impact. And so the vote, yes, you have the right to vote and you absolutely should, make no mistake, but I think we can also do more in our communities.
Yes, another problem is that many people don't vote, even
Yes.
though they have the right to vote. They may even be registered to vote and they still don't vote. And then they complain when they get a government that's giving them problems.
It is very true. But as we study the political system, like I said, I think a lot of the frustration for people is that There are so many micro decisions that are made prior to those last two names on the ballot that it almost feels like we can't affect change.
Well,
We can affect it in some way, but we don't always feel like we can affect the entire system.
well, the problem is if people feel like that, it's never going to change.
Mhm. So we start step one, make sure you vote. Step two, make sure that you fill out the census so that you are counted and your voice is heard and the money moves the way it needs to. What's step three?
I'm sorry, step three,
What is step three?
education. I think that's what the problem is. We have to educate the people as to why it's important and how important it is to them individually to get involved.
Yes, yes. And it sounds like you're doing a lot of outreach to help that.
Yes, we are. The League of Women Voters are doing that. The political parties are doing that. Newspapers are doing that. Newspaper editors, letters to the editor. You read all of that, you see they're just telling people get out there and do what you have to do. And unfortunately, some people are afraid, and some people just don't care.
Well, what I found was interesting when cameras are off and people are calm and someone's listening. People were very interested, but the frustration level was very high. There was significant amount of misunderstandings, unawareness of how things work. A great example, I was in Hawaii and I got the privilege to participate in a demonstration where they were protesting the one of the big telescopes that's going up on one of their islands. And it happens to be being placed on sacred ground. And they were frustrated because no one asked the locals before making this decision, right? It was made in Washington. But what I said in response, how many of you have worked for the federal government or know somebody that has, who sits at those decision tables and makes those choices? And everyone said, I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody who's gone for one of those jobs. And so I was trying to help people understand, like you said, through education, that there are the people we vote for in politics, but there are also government jobs where you get the opportunity to be part of that decision-making team.
That's if they want to work, or at least work for the federal government. Some people may not want to work for the federal government.
Absolutely true, but I think to your point of if we are frustrated with the way things are working in some capacity, there are a number of different ways that we can get involved. Politics is one, but it is not the only. There are also individuals everywhere who are stepping up and being involved in their communities. I met a woman in Nebraska, not involved in politics, not involved in government, but absolutely involved in making sure that when the floods came through and people lost their jobs in the railroad, she was there to make sure that her community was moving.
Yeah, it sounds like people will get involved when they fear or see a crisis. That's when they move up. When there's no crisis, it's apathy.
I like to say that it's like tigers chasing us. When there's no tigers chasing, we become lazy.
May very well be. But of course, we have a modern time now. I come from a time when my first telephone was a party line. God knows today we have it in our hands, but still, today people can get involved because of the internet and,
Yes.
and social media, which we never had when in my days, going back a long time ago. You had to be involved personally, in person, as opposed to being active online as well.
Yes.
So people have an opportunity to get involved without leaving their homes.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the best punchline for today as we move out of hopefully what is extreme lockdown and start switching into the phases the government has been talking about so that we can at least have some folks starting to go back to work. For those of us who are able to be at home, and for those of us who want to get involved but aren't able to get out yet for various reasons, you're absolutely right. Getting online is one way to get involved. As you mentioned, you can fill out the census forms online. You can get involved in a variety of education pieces. League of Women Voters is not just for women, and it is nonpartisan. So it is an excellent group to be part of. Their focus is just on educating people and giving everyone the opportunity to speak and listen. So thank you so much, Ira. We really appreciate your insights and
My
a
pleasure.
vision
I
into your
enjoyed this very much.
experience.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. This is The Nerdy Truth, and I'm your host, Dr. JJ Walcott.